One of my favorite things about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate are the alternate costumes given to every single character in the game. They're a perfect way to reference costumes and characters from a fighter's home series. They're just aesthetic changes, but these go a long way in making Smash just a more in-depth game. Some costumes are much better than others, however, so today I'm going to take a look at all 83 characters and say which alternate costume I think is their best and which is their worst. In Ultimate, each character has 8 costumes, including their default appearance, meaning there are over 600 costumes in the game. But how am I going to be determining which is the best for each character? Well, for one, it has to look good on them, of course. Some colors just simply work better with a character's design, so that's very important. What looks good is different for everybody though, so keep in mind that this video is just my opinion. A costume's origin will also be taken into account. Most costumes in the game are based off of something from a fighter's home series, so the better the reference, the more likely it is to place highly. The final factor is if the costume is a model change. Most costumes are just recolors of the default look, however several characters got costumes that change the model of the fighter in some way. These could be different types of clothes or even different characters entirely, so costumes like this will more than likely get the edge due to them being more unique. As for what makes a costume the worst for a character, you could basically just do the opposite of everything I just said. Is the costume really ugly? If so, it's probably one of the worst. Not having an origin will also likely bring down a costume as well. Finally, if the costume is too similar to another costume, then that will be a huge hit. See, for some reason, not everyone got super distinct costumes. Some characters have one or more that are really close to each other, so in those cases, one of them would likely be the worst since it'd basically be a wasted slot. At the end of the video, I'll also cover the 10 characters I think have the best costumes overall, and the 10 with the worst costumes overall. Since there are so many characters, I won't be spending much time on all of them. Some will go by very quickly, whereas others may take a bit longer. The last thing I want to say before I start here is that this is a remake of an old video I did a while ago. Now that all the characters have come out and I've gotten a bit better at making videos, I decided now is a good time to redo it. And if you have seen the original, my opinions have changed quite a bit, so don't worry about this being too similar. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, but let's jump right into determining every character's best and worst alternate costumes in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Mario is of course our first one up. Oh yeah, going to be going in character order if that wasn't obvious enough. Most of Mario's costumes are actually really good. I guess his overalls go well with a lot of color combinations. In Ultimate, he was given 2 costumes that drastically change his model, which are the 2 in the running for being the best. The first one, Costume 7, is based on his builder outfit in the Mario Maker series. The second one, Costume 8, is based on his wedding outfit from Super Mario Odyssey. These were both great choices for costumes, so choosing between them was very difficult. In the end, I decided that I liked Builder Mario slightly more. I like the red and yellow combo a lot here. Wedding Mario is of course a great choice as well. Lucky for me, Mario's worst alt was super easy as this green one just sucks compared to the other 5 overall colors. It's based on some Japanese box art for Wrecking Crew, which is such an obscure reference when there are so many other costumes Mario has worn over the years that could have been used instead. Heck, they cut the iconic Fire Mario costume but left this green one. While it's not super ugly, compared to the other 7 great costumes, this is easily the worst. Donkey Kong's costumes are much simpler in comparison. My favorite is his 6th alt, referred to as Yeti DK on the Brawl Dojo. I just like how the white looks on him best, no real strong reasoning here. As for the worst, I was originally going to say his 3rd alt was the worst for being too similar to the normal brown look, however its origin is one of the strongest here, being based on the original Donkey Kong color scheme. So instead I'm going with his green alt as the worst, simply due to the colors. Link's alternate costume showing is pretty strong. My personal favorite is his 4th alt. Not only is it a model change from the Champion's tunic to the Tunic of the Wild, but the specific coloration is based off the Fierce Deity's mask from Majora's Mask. That being my favorite Zelda game, I'm obviously pretty biased towards it. Like Mario, Link's costumes overall are very good, however there is a distinct loser among them being the 6th alt. It's based on Twilight Princess Link, but it just ends up being a duller version of the Tunic of the Wild. This is certainly not an ugly costume though, it's just a bit too similar to another for my liking. Samus was pretty difficult to decide on a best for as alts 7 and 8 are pretty much equal in terms of how they look. In the end, I decided to go with the white alt, which is based on the light suit from Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. The reason I put the dark one lower is because you could just play as Dark Samus if you want a dark alternative. As for the worst, her 3rd alt is easily my least favorite here, its colors just don't stand out compared to the original. Dark Samus was very difficult because I'm just really not a fan of most of these costumes. Since I have to choose though, I'm going with the 7th alt because the black color scheme works best for Dark Samus, for obvious reasons. It's also apparently based on its original incarnation as the Metroid Prime. Oh yeah, I'm using the Smash Wiki for info on most of these costumes by the way. I definitely would not have known a good chunk of these without it. I decided her green alt is the worst one because 1, it looks ugly, and 2, it doesn't have any origin listed. Honestly though, Dark Samus's design really does not work with colors that aren't dark. Yoshi's colors are mostly pretty simple, so my favorite is the blue one. Not only do I like the color blue, but it's also based on the blue Yoshis from Mario World, which were easily the best ones because they were able to fly when they had a shell in their mouths. As for the worst, this is one of the rare times where a model change is the worst costume of the bunch, but there is nothing to defend Crafted Yoshi about. Its texture is really ugly, like I just hate looking at this thing. I would have much rather had Yarn Yoshi, but since Crafted Yoshi was more recent, it got the edge. But being ugly isn't even its worst crime, far from it in fact. No, the real reason it's down here is because it replaced Yoshi's by far best ult in Smash 4, Black Yoshi. I will never forgive this thing for what it did. Bring Black Yoshi back for Smash 6. Okay, back to not being negative, we have my main next to Mario, Young Link, and Steve, Kirby. Now this is our first really interesting case where I genuinely think his default appearance is his best ult. I'm going to be mostly ignoring default appearances for this video, but I just feel that Kirby looks somewhat unnatural in any other color. Not that the other colors are bad though, it's just that I really like his classic pink. If I had to choose a second best to replace the default though, I'd go with his white ult as it's a really fun reference to how he originally looked in Kirby's Dream Land. My least favorite Kirby ult is the red one based on Fire Kirby, only because I think the orange Kirby does the sort of fire color scheme better. I know that the red one is literally based on Fire Kirby, but I just like the orange one better, so red is going to take last here. My favorite ult from Fox is his orange one based on Falco's appearance in Star Fox 64. I just like the color. His worst is his 6th ult since it's the only one to not have any origin listed and it's a bit too close to his green ult based on the Player 4 costume from Star Fox Assault's Versus mode. The white costume still looks good though, but it's the worst one here. Pikachu is our first character to not really change colors. In most cases, I don't really like this, as it makes the ult much less unique. However, Pikachu was given a unique hat based on a trainer from the Pokemon series for each one, so at least they're a bit distinct. I did just lie to you all though, as my favorite Pikachu ult isn't based on a trainer, but instead Pikachu Libre. It would have been a crime if this wasn't included, so I'm happy it was. Oh yeah, and did you know that Pikachu Libre is a girl? Speaking of female Pikachu, I think the worst ult is the other female Pikachu based on Celine's cap from Sun and Moon. I just don't really like how this headgear looks compared to the others Pikachu has. Luigi's best of course has to be his 6th ult based on Waluigi. Not only is it a good reference, but I just like the color scheme a lot. Honorable mentions to his 5th ult based on Fire Luigi though, I like that one a lot. I think his 7th ult is the worst, as I don't really like the color combo. Also, I do remember getting a lot of comments about that on my last video. I guess this is a really popular color amongst Luigi players. But Luigi players are weird anyway, so their opinions are invalid. I really like Nessa's 6th ult, which has a Mr. Saturn sprite printed on the shirt. Not only is that a nice little reference, but I also really like the purple and black color scheme. His worst is definitely his 4th ult. It's not ugly, but the color scheme just doesn't stand out much. The origin listed on the website is also a huge reach in my opinion, apparently being based on Everdread from Earthbound, but it's very loose. Captain Falcon is another character with a very strong selection, but I'm going to have to say the pink and white ult is my favorite. It's based on Jodie Summer from F-Zero X, and the color combo is really strong here. The gold ult based on Dr. Stewart is also a really strong contender as well. Falcon's 5th ult is easily the worst though, which is a bit too similar to his default look for my liking. Jigglypuff is another character like Pikachu, where she doesn't really change color, but her hats change. Her 5th ult is my favorite, which features a sleepy hat. Interestingly, this isn't actually based on something from the Pokemon series, but rather it's from Kirby, which I really like. Not many costumes reference other franchises, and it fits perfectly here on Jigglypuff. Speaking of Kirby, I actually think her default appearance deserves to be here in one of these positions, but instead of being the best, I think it's her worst. The hats just all add so much personality that it makes the default look so boring comparatively. If you don't count default appearances, then her 2nd ult is my least favorite as it's the only one without a listed origin. And with that, we finally made it through the original 12 characters from Smash 64, and Dark Samus. Let's move on to her reps from Melee. Princess Peach is up and her best one is easily her red and white dress. Not only is the color scheme really nice, but it has not one, but 2 origins as well. Nowadays, it's a reference to Fire Peach from Super Mario 3D World, however it's also based on her original dress from Super Mario Bros. Her worst has to be the gold one simply because it's just really ugly. It doesn't have an origin either, but it's not like it would have helped if it did. Daisy's white outfit is probably my favorite for her. It's not really based on anything other than a wedding gown, but I still like it. Her pink dress and her 3rd ult is probably my least favorite though. It's a cute reference to how Peach used to have brown hair in games like Mario 2 and 3, but honestly, just play Peach at that point. The King of the Koopas, Bowser, has a very strong selection here, but I think his 5th ult has the best color combination with the different grays and yellows. It's based on Morton's design from Mario 3 and World, so it's a decent reference as well. My least favorite is easily his 6th ult, as it barely changes his looks besides giving him pinkish hair, which isn't even that different of a color from Bowser's red hair. It's supposed to be based on Giga Bowser, but since that's Bowser's final smash anyway, this costume just feels like a complete waste. Ice Climbers were really difficult to decide for, since they only come from a single NES game. Most of their costumes are completely made up for Smash. Luckily, my favorite, their 7th alt, is actually based on when they get hit by an enemy in their original game. Their mittens are also the color of their default looks, pink for Nana and blue for Popo, which is just a nice touch. Oh yeah, a neat thing the Ice Climbers do with their alts is that the first 4 have Popo as the main climber and the other 4 have Nana. It's hard to notice, but it's a good detail regardless. Their worst alt is going to be their 4th alt, as I just find it to be a worse version of their 2nd. Yeah, Ice Climbers alts are pretty weak overall, but they didn't have much to work on, so I can't really complain. Sheik's best has to be her black, as it's the most distinct, being the only one to actually change Sheik's hair as well. The dark colors also match with her whole ninja aesthetic perfectly. Her worst is going to be her 3rd alt based on her Ocarina of Time appearance. This only changes the colors and not the design, so it's far too close to the default appearance, despite making sense to reference. Again, had this been a model change, then I would have liked it much more, but as it is now, it's just a bit too similar. Funnily enough, Zelda pretty much has the same reasoning for her best and worst alts. Her 6th alt is my favorite due to how distinct the dark color scheme is, and my least favorite is her 4th one based on Ocarina of Time Zelda for being too similar to her default look. Here especially, it would have been really nice to get a model swap. If you think anything but Dr. Mario's Black alt is his best, then I'm sorry, you just have bad opinions. It was referred to as the unlicensed Doctor on the Melee website, which I just find to be really funny. I'm going to have to give the award of worst Dr. Mario alt to the purple one though. It's the only one to not have an origin of any kind listed on the website. Plus, I don't really find the color scheme to be that appealing. I know this kind of goes against my too similar rule, but my favorite Pichu alt is definitely the spiky ear Pichu. It's a really neat reference to an actual Pichu from the games, where it was a special event Pokemon in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Considering that most of the Pokemon's alts in Smash aren't really based on their own appearances, I'll gladly take this. My least favorite for Pichu is his default for the same reason as Jigglypuff, but if you don't count defaults, then my least favorite is the Red Ribbon, as it doesn't really have a solid origin. Falco's 6th alt is easily my favorite due to the dark color scheme. His 5th alt is definitely his worst though, because it doesn't have a listed origin, and I just don't like it as much as his 7th alt. I really like the gold design of Marth's 7th alt. They did a lot better with this than whatever that monstrosity Peach got anyway. His worst alt is this blue one because, I mean, come on, you can barely tell the difference between this and his default look. My favorite for Lucina is her 5th alt based off of Tiki. I like most of Lucina's alts as the hair color changes work really well for her. My least favorite for her though would have to be her 3rd alt. It's just too similar to her 4th one. I like the 4th one a bit better because I just like the consistent red design a little bit more. Now I like to use the white alt for Young Link, which is based on the blue ring from the original Legend of Zelda, however I think it would be a bit disingenuous to call it the best one. The Dark Link alt is clearly a much more extreme change, so I think that's going to have to take the top spot. It's obviously based on Dark Link if you couldn't tell. As for his worst, I'm going to go with his 5th alt, as it's supposed to be based on Breath of the Wild Link, who's already playable. Honestly, while this costume selection is certainly solid, I think it would have been really cool if one of his alts featured a mask from Majora's Mask like the Keaton mask or his mirror shield from that game. Just a bit of a missed opportunity. Ganondorf's best one is definitely the 7th alt. It gives him really cool blue skin and gray hair. It reminds me a lot of just general ice characters, which I think is pretty neat. His worst is easily the 2nd one, as it doesn't have any origin and it's a bit too close to the default look. Mewtwo's costumes overall are sort of disappointing to me, but at least his last alt is a really neat dark design. I mean, Mewtwo does have a dark design from Pokken that they could have used here, but this one based on Shadow Lugia does look pretty good. I think I'm going to have to give the award of worst to his 5th alt, based on the original artwork from Red and Blue. Obviously, since Mewtwo's design and colors haven't changed much since then, this costume is just a bit too similar to his default look. Roy has an overall very strong selection of alts, so it was hard to choose an absolute best one. Heck, whenever I play Roy, I go between like 3 different alts. I think the 2 best ones are his 2nd and 8th alts, but I decided to give the slight edge to the 8th one based on Boris from Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. I think his worst though is going to be his 4th costume based on Marcus. It's pretty much just a middle ground for alts 6 and 7, and I find those to be much more appealing. Chrome's best was easy, as his white one is by far the most distinct. A lot of his other costumes are more dark and bleak, but this one is actually pretty bright. I also like the addition of the orange cape, it really just ties everything together nicely. Much like Roy, Chrome's worst is his 5th alt due to him having other dark costumes like his 6th alt. I find this black to just be a little bit less appealing than the others. Mr. Game & Watch's best is going to be his white alt based on the screen of old Game & Watch games. I just like this as an inverse to the default, so it's my alt whenever I choose to play him. Now for a character like Game & Watch, who is literally a solid color, you would think that his alts would be pretty distinct from one another as they'd be pretty easy to make. but this is his alt selection. Why does he have 4 alts that are just some sort of variation of blue? Okay, one of them is technically green, but they all look too similar. 2 would have been acceptable, but this is just too much. Of the selection, the worst is definitely his 5th costume, as it's literally just a middle ground between darker blue and lighter blue. Game & Watch definitely has some of the most disappointing alts of the entire cast. But with that, we conclude Melee. 3 more Smash games to go, so let's jump right into Brawl. Meta Knight got a pretty good set this time around, but it's definitely between Galactic Knight and Dark Meta Knight for the title of Best. They both actually changed the design of the mask, which really adds to making these guys much closer to what they're trying to reference. I think I'm going to have to give the edge to Galactic Knight though, as the bright pink and white color combo is just too good to ignore. His green alt based on one of his costumes in Kirby Air Ride is definitely the worst, it's just not as appealing as the others. Now Pit was really hard to choose a best for, but not because all the alts are good, it's actually because they're all just sort of mediocre. Honestly, I think his default is my favorite, but for those of you that don't count those, I think I'll give it to his 3rd alt, which is based on when he has the gold arrow and level 4 strength in the original Kid Icarus. His worst though was easy, it's this atrocious white alt. The blonde hair on Pit just looks terrible, I honestly think less of you if you use this alt. Electroshock! My favorite for Dark Pit is his 3rd alt based off of Magnus, as I think the color scheme fits him really nicely and it's also one of the only choices with an actual origin. I'm going to be giving last to costume number 8 because it's just too similar to the default. Zero Suit Samus's black definitely goes best with her Zero Suit, so it's an easy choice for me. Her 2nd alt is without a doubt the worst because, once again, it's just too similar to the default. Now I've always been annoyed that Wario's biker alt is his default in Smash. It's not that I don't like the alts, I'm really happy they're here, but his overalls are just far more iconic. But that does mean I can actually say his default overalls are the best costume without comments getting upset because that's not his default costume. Anyways, his worst is going to be his red biker alt, as Wario's red overalls based on Mario's look from the original Donkey Kong is just much more appealing. We finally reached Smash's first third-party character with Solid Snake. I'm going to have to give it to a 7th alt because... oh, where did it go? You all get it. The joke, I mean. See, it's funny because he's wearing camouflage and you aren't supposed to be able to see Anyways, his worst costume is 6 as I feel like the coloration is just a bit too similar to the default look. Ike is obvious. Why would you ever choose to play as this baby version of Ike when you can play as the Chad true version of him? His 2nd alt is easily the best for that reason. Obviously, one of the baby Ikes would have to get last place, so I'm going to be giving it to his 3rd alt because it's the only one without an origin and it's just not very appealing color-wise. Alright, Pokemon Trainer is a big one because there are 4 characters we need to talk about here. The trainer itself, Squirtle, Ivysaur, and Charizard. For the trainer, I've always been a big fan of Red himself, so the default look is my personal favorite, but if you don't count that, then the second one being based on the female Pokemon trainer would be the next choice. The worst one is definitely going to be the 5th alt based on the trainer from Diamond and Pearl, as the colors aren't that distinct and they just look kind of ugly overall. Speaking of ugly, man do those Diamond and Pearl remakes look awful. Anyways, Squirtle's best is this green one, as it's based on his shiny. For whatever reason, most of the Pokemon in Smash don't have their shinies as alts. I mean, they're literally recolors in the Pokemon games. Why aren't they here? Many people think it's because of the Pokemon Company not allowing Nintendo to use them, so just more reason to dislike them. Squirtle's alts could pretty much all be the worst because most of them suck, but the one I chose is the 4th one as it's a bit too similar to the default. Ivysaur's best is his 5th one as it's based on his shiny coloration and it's also the most distinct color-wise with the yellow bulb. His worst is the 4th option because it's the closest costume to the default. Charizard's red alt based on Charmeleon is my favorite, though I like most of his alts. His green one is going to be my least favorite though, as the color isn't as good as the others, but it's far from being bad. Back to normal characters, Diddy Kong's alts are also just pretty unappealing all around. I was tempted to give the best spot to his default appearance, but I think his black alt is decent enough to surpass it. Last place easily goes to the pink one based on Dixie Kong. It's a good reference, but this color combo looks terrible on Diddy. Overall, his design just doesn't work great with many other colors, so his alts are pretty bland. Lucas was easy as he has a shirt with Boney on it.
What the dog doing?
His worst is going to be his 4th alt as it's just a really bland color scheme and it doesn't have a listed origin. Back to another character whose costumes suck, we have Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm going to guess that Sega didn't want his colors to change much because every single one of his costumes are some sort of blue. It's not even like Sonic couldn't work with other colors, they just made all of these super bland for no reason. His black alt is the furthest from being blue, so it has to be the best one. Would have been cool if it was more based on Shadow, but I'll take what we can get with this guy. His worst could really be any of the others, so I'm going to go with the yellow one because, well, it's blue, but also because I feel like this could have been a nice Tails reference, but they just didn't change anything other than his shoes and wristbands. King Dedede's monochrome is a really great reference to the original Kirby's Dream Land, so that's my choice for his best. Finding a worse was hard, but in the end I went with his 7th alt as I feel like it's just a worse version of his 5th alt. Olimar is kind of a loser, so Alf is going to be the best costume he's got. This is our first instance of an alt that changes their announcer call as it's an entirely different character, which is neat to see. The worst costume also belongs to Alf though, but it's when he's in a costume based on Olimar. Okay, why on earth would you give Alf a costume based on Olimar, when he's literally a costume for Olimar? Like, just play as Olimar. This is definitely one of the dumbest costume choices in the game. Lucario's costumes also suck just like Sonic's. One thing I found really funny about Lucario is that on the Smash Wiki they didn't even bother to set up an origin chart for his costumes. He literally is the only character to be like this, which I just find really funny. I mean, it's not like any of these alts have origins anyway. His best is definitely the gray alt, as it's the most different while still having an appealing color. Now, in most cases, I'd say the worst alt is one that's too similar to another, but this green and pink alt is disgusting. Like, I genuinely want to meet the person who came up with this color combo. It's horrific and does not look good at all. This might just be the single ugliest costume in the game. Sorry, I'll move on so that you don't have to burn your eyes anymore. Rob is actually a pretty interesting character in terms of costumes, as he's the only one to have two different default appearances depending on the region of the game. In Japan, the red and white alt will be his first one, whereas in America, his gray alt is his default. Those are the only two countries in the world, by the way. I think his best is going to be the red one based on the Virtual Boy, as it's a fun reference and it also looks pretty good as well. His worst is probably the dark blue one, since I prefer his lighter blue alt. Toon Link also got a Dark Link variant, so that's going to be his best as well. Now his worst costume sadly has two contenders, number 5 and number 8. They're both green costumes on a character whose default is already green. The fifth one is based on the original Link from the NES Legend of Zelda, and this does do a great job of referencing that, so it's slightly better than number 8. Now what's that one based on? Well, it's the Link from A Link to the Past. But that Link has pink hair, whereas this alt just has yellow hair again. If this was given the iconic pink hair from that game, then I would have liked this much more, but as it is now, it's just a very weak reference. Wolf's blue really works well with his design, so I'm a big fan of this costume. As for his worst costume, I don't hate his second costume, but I just think it's the worst version of his orange look. That's our last one for Brawl. It's time for Smash 4. Villager got very good costumes in Smash, as they give him a unique face and haircut to go with the new clothing. My personal favorite is his third alt, since I like yellow the best. However, that did not save their worst alt. While they are also wearing yellow, their face... Mega Man's best is his second one based off his dog Rush, because I am dog biased. And the color scheme looks very nice as well. His sixth alt is this weird green and yellow combo based on his look with the Slash Claw in Mega Man 7. Just not really a huge fan of this color scheme. Wii Fit Trainer's alts are all on the same level of just being pretty decent, so it was hard to find one that stuck out as being really good or really bad here.
I decided their third one was the best, as I find it to be the most iconic of their alts.
The red male is going to be the worst one, since it's the only one based on a category color in Wii Fit rather than something they actually wore. The female trainer is also much more iconic than the male one, putting this one down at the bottom. Cringe's best alt is her last one based on Fire Peach, as it reminds me of a character that isn't Rosalina. Oh yeah, I bet you Rosalina stands are crying hard right now. Go ahead, try and dislike the video. Oh, YouTube removed the dislike bar, how sad for you! Guess I'll just have to cope in the comments, you poor things. Okay, seriously though, YouTube, add the dislike bar back. This update is stupid. Oh yeah, and her worst alt is the gold one because it looks ugly. Little Mac's iconic hoodie had to be represented somewhere, so his alt using it is my personal favorite. As for Mac's worst costume, I'm going to go with the fifth one. While being a good reference to the protagonist of Super Punch-Out, it's still pretty similar to Little Mac's default look, and the brown hair just doesn't look as good as the black hair. For similar reasons as she, Greninja's black costume is my favorite. It just fits him being a ninja. It's loosely based on his shiny, but this is another example of Smash clearly avoiding going all the way with it. They're both black, but the whole coloration is clearly different. Despite that, I do really like this alt. Also, shoutouts to the pink alt. I don't really think it's particularly great to look at, but the reference is very creative, using the color scheme from the Pokemon Lickitung, who also prominently features his tongue in his design. I think Greninja's fifth alt is going to take last place for me, as the green and purple are just weird colors to combine together. Palutena's black alt looks the best for me, and her worst is probably her last alt based on Medusa, just due to it being a worse version of her best. All of Palutena's alts are pretty strong though. Pac-Man. Oh boy, these alts are terrible. Just like Sonic, they pretty much just changed Pac-Man's accessories. However, while Sonic himself did change a few shades, Pac-Man is the exact same color of yellow across all 8 alternate costumes. Considering Namco themselves helped develop Smash, there's really no excuse for the costumes to be like this. His best is going to be his last one, as I think making his gloves oven mitts is just a fun thing to do, but all of the other alts could land themselves in last place. I went with the red one because it changes him the least from his default, but man, what a weak set. Luckily, Robin's alts go back to being pretty good, being another character to get both male and female variants. My favorite is going to be their 7th alt. Not only is the color combo solid, but this costume is a reference to the white mages from Final Fantasy, making this another one of those rare costumes to reference a series outside of a fighter's origin. I also find this one even more interesting as this alt was added back in Smash 4, before Cloud and thus Final Fantasy was even added in as DLC. Finding a worse for Robin was pretty difficult, but I decided to go with the blue one. I only did this because I like the brighter hair of the Smash 4 version more than this depressing blue. It does make the reference stronger though, so it's not really that bad. Shulk's best one is his last one for obvious reasons. The rest of his alts are just pretty mediocre. The hair color change just doesn't work well for Shulk. Maybe it's just because Shulk himself looks very bad in Ultimate though. I decided to give last place to his 5th alt based on Charla, as its color combo works the worst in my opinion. Now we have arrived to the king of alternate costumes, Bowser Jr. Up until this point, we've seen a few fighters that have gender swaps or in some rare cases, different characters as some of their costumes. Bowser Jr. is different though, as each of his alts are a different character, being one of the 7 Koopalings. Each has their own voice lines and announcer calls, making these some of the best alternate costumes in the game. Whichever one is the best is going to basically come down to whichever one is your favorite, but for me, that was Ludwig. I'm going to be giving last place to Iggy, not because he's my least favorite Koopaling, rather it's because he was implemented the worst. Since the Koopalings do have to reuse all of Bowser Jr.'s animations, they all have to be the same size as him. Luckily, most of the Koopalings work well here, but Iggy is known for being very tall, so he looks very strange when being shrunk down. Obviously, this isn't really Iggy's fault, but I sadly can't say he's not the worst Koopaling costume. Duck Hunt's alts are all pretty decent, so like Wii Fit, it was hard to find one that stuck out as being particularly great or terrible. I think my favorite is his last alt, as the duck is one of the 3 ducks actually from Duck Hunt and the color scheme just looks really nice. I think his 3rd alt is my least favorite, but it's not really that bad. The first fighter to originate as DLC, Ryu, is up. I've got to go with his 4th alt based on his light punch as his best. I like the mix of the dark clothing with the bright yellow headband, it's a pretty unique look. On the opposite side of uniqueness, his 3rd alt, based on his default appearance from Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting, is far too close to the normal white of the default look. Just like his original Ryu, Ken got a dark alt as well, though this one goes even further by shifting the skin tone to match the costume a little bit better. Ken was given another dark alt as well, which I'm going to be giving the award of worst to because it's completely pointless compared to the actually really cool last color. Cloud's costumes are, well, hard to tell apart from one another. Unlike Pac-Man or Sonic, at the very least, half of Cloud's alts are based on the Advent Children movie rather than his look from Final Fantasy VII, so his 2nd alt is my favorite. Aside from his default looks from Final Fantasy VII and Advent Children though, the other alts are just complete garbage. You can barely tell them apart from each other at all, which is just a horrible design choice. I'm giving the title of worst Cloud costume to his 6th alt, where literally the only change is that his sleeve is torn off in this one where it isn't in the default. Listen, I get that it's important to the movie, but in gameplay it's basically impossible to notice this difference at all. Man, they did Cloud so dirty here. The worst addition to Smash Bros, Corrin, unsurprisingly has very bland costumes. At least their last color based on their appearance as Nor Noble has a pretty good color scheme. Actually, it's pretty close to the Ryu one I mentioned before now that I think about it. The blue one is the worst one for not only having no origin, but also being attached to male Corrin, which I swear they went out of their way to make more boring than the female skin. I mean, they're both lame, but just look at the difference between these 2 renders. Let's hope the next character is a bit better. Bayonetta is not better. Her design does not really work well with other colors at all. Her default look is definitely my choice, but as a runner-up, I guess it'd be her 7th alt, the only other one that I'd say doesn't look bad. My least favorite is her 4th alt, based on her green costume in Anarchy Reigns. I'm just not really a fan of the Bayonetta 1 design. It's nice that they included it, but I just don't like it much. Green is also definitely the worst color this costume got as well. And with that, we have just one more Smash game to go. It's time for Smash Ultimate. Inklings are like villagers, where each is given their own unique design based on clothing from their original title. Additionally, each got their own ink color as well, which makes them stand out from one another during a match. My favorite is the dark purple Inkling, as safety is very important gamers, always make sure to wear a helmet. Light blue is the worst for being a nerd. Yes, I know he's based on specs from the manga, you all told me that several times in the comments. And listen, all I'm saying is, you all sound like people who would enjoy the nerd Inkling alt. Ridley has 2 alts based on Mecha Ridley, which is really neat. I think I like the gray combo just a bit more, but both are pretty solid. His 4th costume based on Neo Ridley is just a bit too similar to his default, so it's my least favorite. I know many of you may argue that his 6th alt does as well, but the green wings go a long way in both making him stand out and tying him to the original reference, being his original design from the NES Metroid. So that means this blue one is the worst. Simon's costumes are all just really boring. Like Bayo, I don't think it works well with alternate colors.
I decided his last one was my favorite.
Being based off of Trevor Belmont's doppelganger. His third costume based on the Super Castlevania 4 box art is the worst for being too similar to the original. The actually good Castlevania rep Richter got some better costumes than Simon. I think his yellow one based on John Morris is my favorite. I like the yellow, and it's also the only one to drastically change the headband color. The 7th costume also changes it as well, just not by much. Speaking of not much change, this 6th alt is way too close to the default look. The only real difference is the inside of the collar. Easily the worst one offered here. King K. Rool somehow works extremely well with several different colors, making every single one of his alts look pretty decent. White is definitely my personal favorite, but I could see any one of these being in contention. I do think his 7th alt based off of Clump is my least favorite, but it's not really by much. Isabelle was given both her spring, summer, and fall, winter designs in Smash. While the spring design is of course more iconic, I've always liked the fall look better. Of the selection here, I'm going to go with the light blue one as my favorite, despite it not really having an origin. Now, despite having some mostly pretty good costumes, Isabelle may just have the two most similar costumes in the entire game, being her 3rd and 5th alts. I have no idea why they'd give her two very similar pink alts, as it just makes one of them completely useless. The 3rd one is based on her casual outfit, so I'm giving the 5th one last place as it's not based on seemingly anything. It would have been nice if maybe she was given her glasses for the 3rd alt to make them stick out from one another, but really the 2nd one should have just been something completely different. Incineroar has our last instance of a costume referencing something outside of their own franchise, but luckily it is my favorite of this very niche type of costume. That costume would be his 6th alt, seemingly based on Big the Cat from Sonic. You know, it's kind of funny how Incineroar's costumes do a better job at referencing the Sonic franchise than, well, Sonic himself. His 7th alt also looks really good, by the way. Definitely thought it was worthy of an honorable mention. My least favorite from Incineroar is his 3rd alt based on his pre-evolution Linton. His whole face being black just does not look good for me. It makes the whole alt feel unbalanced, if that makes any sort of sense. Now it's time for the final stretch, Smash Ultimate's DLC. Before we get to the Fighters Passes though, we of course have to take a look at Plant. Obviously, his best one is the white one, due to it being based on the Bone Plant, which is part of the Dry Bones family. Dry Bones for Smash. Honestly, all of Plant's alts are pretty solid, but I think my least favorite is the purple costume based on, well, a purple piranha plant. It's the only one to change its lips, and I'm not really a fan of how it looks. The slight pink is just kind of gross for some reason. Joker kicked off the Fighters Passes with some pretty strong alts. My favorite has got to be the purple one based on the original Persona's color scheme. That's because it reminds me of, as Markiplier so kindly stated in the last Smash video, Purple Guy! Picking out a worst was really hard here. I like that the main costumes were all based on the Persona game's different colors, and his 2 school uniforms were great touches as well. That just left this one based on Titan, which is a cool reference, but I think the color scheme works the worst on Joker himself, so it's currently my least favorite. Hero is a lot like Bowser Jr., though this time only half of his alts are unique characters, making the other half alts for each one of them. They sadly don't get new announcer calls either, but these are still really good costumes. Again, this will be based on which hero you like better. I personally prefer the Luminary, but since he's the default one, my next choice would be Eredrick due to him being the most iconic. The alt colors for Hero are great as well, so choosing a worst was very difficult, but I settled on this alt for Solo as he's my least favorite hero. The orange color scheme still looks good though, which is just the worst of a really good batch. Banjo and Kazooie is back to having some more generic costumes, though his last one based on Gruntilda looks surprisingly really good. The reference is of course very strong, but I'm just very happy with how the color scheme works with these two. As for their worst, I'm going to have to give it to costume number 4, as Banjo himself is way too close to the default look. Terry's last alt with the wolf on his hat is my favorite. I think his gray costume is the worst because it's just a less extreme version of his black alt. I was originally going to give last place to his 5th costume for being too close to default, but I do like the Neo Geo logo printed on the hat, so gray takes last instead. Byleth was of course the final choice for the first Fighters Pass, and his costumes are pretty solid for the most part. My favorite is the yellow one based on Claude, as I really like the black hair and yellow combo. Now for whatever reason, both male and female Byleth were given alts where the only change is that their hair is slightly more green. I get that it's an important part of their game, but to take up 2 costume slots for this reference is a bit lame for me. The female one is definitely the worst of the two though, as she already had another green-haired alt based on Sothis. Preferably, this last one would have been changed out for something else, but as it is now, this is a pretty lame choice. Min Min's alts are all pretty mad, so there weren't really any standouts. Her yellow alt is my favorite, and her pink alt is my least favorite due to it being too close to her light blue alt. Now, as your local Minecraft player, I was very happy about Steve's alternate costume selection, giving us 4 unique characters much like Hero. These were all given unique announcer calls as well. My favorite to use is still Steve, just because I like the main man himself a lot. I'm very happy with them using his beard design as well instead of the modern design, as I think Steve looks way better with the beard. Zombie would probably be my runner-up, though Enderman and Alex were also great as well. As for his worst, well, this was easy. I've said it many times before, but Look, I get Tennis Steve is an iconic costume due to it being the default Player 2 look on Legacy console, but it's just so ugly. Tuxedo Steve is also way more liked anyway, and he's nowhere to be seen. For some reason, Tennis Alex was also included, so what's the point of having 2 whole skins based on Tennis? It's not like Tennis is integral to Minecraft in any way, so I would cut out Tennis Steve, replace him with Tuxedo Steve, and then Steve's ult would be perfect. Though I would still want a Herobrine skin. Come on, Sephiroth's shirtless ults are clearly the best. Unlike Shulk, he actually gets 2 of them, which I'm really happy about. I like the first shirtless one more, but the second one is also really great. The ults with the coats suck though. Not only is he not shirtless in them, but the coat's different colors are cloud levels of bad. I don't know what it is about these Final Fantasy characters, but their costumes just do not like them to change much. I mean, Hero is also from Square Enix, but their ults are fantastic. No idea what went wrong here. The second ult is definitely the closest to the original, but realistically, any of them could have been chosen as the worst. If you're not going to play as shirtless Sephiroth like a normal person, just go default. Pyramithra's ults are all kind of mediocre, but I think that's just due to their designs. I was gonna do them both separately, but I actually think they share the same best and worst costumes. My favorite is their 6th ult because the coloration reminds me of Colgate toothpaste, and their worst is definitely their 7th. For most costumes that are too similar to the original look, they at least have some sort of origin to go with it, but here, the origin is literally just their default colors, but more saturated. Yeah, that's pretty dumb. Kazuya's costumes are great, representing both his original Tekken design and his suit from Tekken 7. I of course like the suit more, I mean he just looks so good in it. The purple one based on his tuxedo from Tekken 5 is my favorite, though the black suit and white suit are both really strong contenders as well. The same cannot be said for his gold suit though. For some reason they decided to change his hair color to be gold as well, which makes this costume one of the ugliest to look at in the game. It does make the reference to the metallic gold custom costume stronger, but it just looks really ugly. And now for our final character, Sora. His ults are also really good, with there being 4 different main designs used here. Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, Dreams, and 3 all get their default appearances referenced, with each of them also getting unique renders as well. Deciding a best was easy though, as the Timeless River ult was an easy #1 choice.
In the original game, it's based on the old Mickey Mouse cartoons like Steamboat Willie.
Seeing that art style referenced in Smash is just such a nice treat. This ended up being one of the most unique costumes in the entire game. Deciding a worst was very difficult to do though, there's not a single bad one here. I went with the second costume based on Kingdom Hearts 2, only because it's a bit closer color-wise to his 4th ult, which I like better. I'm not really sure if I myself even agree with that choice, but I genuinely don't know which of these could have even been the worst. I'm pretty happy to end off the characters on a pretty high note here. Now that was every single character's best and worst costumes. However, I did promise 2 top 10s, one for the best overall costumes and one for the worst. Since I want to end on a positive note, let's look first at the worst ones. Diddy Kong is at number 10, and really, his ults aren't that bad. It was pretty hard to find 10 characters whose ults were bad. I don't really find any of his costumes to look that good, so that's why he's just barely able to make this top 10. Simon's design just doesn't work well with different colors, so he'll take 9. Much like Diddy, these aren't that bad, but there's really nothing I'd say is good. Mr. Game & Watch is at 8th due to how much missed potential he had. These 4 ults are just far too similar to each other. Changing them into something completely different color-wise would have made Game & Watch's costumes much more fun. Sephiroth's coats are some of the worst ults in the series. All of them are far too similar to the default look. He was saved by his shirtless ults though, which kept him down to only being number 7. Sadly though, the selection overall isn't great. Lucario's ults are pretty much just blue or really ugly. None of the costumes have any origins, making his selection super bland compared to every other fighter, giving Lucario 6th place. Squirtle's ults are literally just all blue. There is no major change in the color of Squirtle's body. Luckily, his shell does change a decent amount occasionally, so he gets 5th place instead of being higher. Bayonetta's alt colors just do not look appealing to me at all. Her having 2 designs and her costumes at least being recognizably different did save her from being any higher than 4th though. Cloud's costumes are just way too hard to tell apart from one another, especially in a match with multiple Clouds. Again, he's only really saved by the fact he has 2 different designs, but the colors themselves are near indistinguishable from one another. Sonic just being variations of blue stings a lot, especially since I think he'd work really well with other colors. Heck, even if they wanted to keep him blue, they could have at least thrown in a few more references. Maybe he could have gotten his scarf from Sonic Boom, or maybe his shoes from the Adventure titles. Just something more than blue with random wristbands that are completely irrelevant to the Sonic franchise. Luckily though, there are a few distinct ults here, which keep him from being number 1, but he's still going to be runner-up. The character with the worst overall alts in the game has to be Pac-Man. They're all the exact same tone of yellow, at least Sonic and even Cloud to an extent change colors a bit, but Pac-Man is always just yellow. On top of that, there were definitely opportunities for extra costumes. A Miss Pac-Man alt would have just been perfect for him, or maybe even different colors based on the 4 main ghosts from the series. Just something better than his gloves and shoes slightly changing between costumes. Now it's time for the 10 characters with the best overall costumes. There were several characters that I wanted to add in here, so if your favorite isn't here, there's a good chance they only barely missed out. I'm putting Jigglypuff at 10th as I really like all of the unique hats she was given. They're nothing too crazy, which is what puts her at only number 10, but I appreciate the effort of modeling 7 unique headpieces for her. Kazuya looks great in both his standard and suit designs. I love the color combos on most of his suits, however that really ugly gold suit does bring him down to being only 9th place, but it's still a really strong position. Link's costumes are surprisingly strong as well, having a good combo of Breath of the Wild references and references to previous Links in the franchise. While the Fierce Deity, Skyward Sword, and Dark Link alts are all perfect, the Twilight Princess Link does sadly bring Link down a bit to 8th. But this is still a great set. Villager does a great job showcasing the customization aspect of Animal Crossing and their alts. I think it was really important that he got costumes similar to these, and I think they deliver, giving so many unique hairstyles and clothing styles. Sadly, this thing is in there, so we'd have to move down a bit to 7. Our last character, Sora, doesn't have a single bad costume among his 8 options. Him having 4 entirely different designs plus his unique Timeless River look help him a ton. Sadly, I do think his 2nd, 3rd, and 4th alts are just a bit too similar color-wise to move him up higher than 6th, but none of them look bad at the very least. On to the top 5, and my Mario bias is kicking in as I think his costumes are all really strong. Mario's overalls just work great with so many different color combos, even his worst alt isn't that bad. Having my favorite video game and my favorite Mario spin-offs represented in 2 brand new modeled costumes were definitely the push he needed to make it to the top 5. Inkling's multitude of different customization options were great to see, just like Villager. There aren't any here that look ugly though, which is what kept Villager lower down. The change in the ink color though is the major reason why I like these best. It's a great way to make each of them distinct and also reference Splatoon's general gameplay. The reason this is only 4th is because the other 3 characters just went a bit farther, but the Inklings definitely did a great job. Steve brought over 4 entirely different characters into the game. Alex was obvious, but Zombie and especially Enderman were great surprises. Even though Enderman had to be shrunken down to fit Steve's model, it doesn't look bad at all. In fact, I kind of find it to be more charming. There are only 2 things keeping Steve from 2nd place. 1, while I appreciate the main 4 all getting their own announcer calls, I think it would have been nice to give the Zombie and Enderman alts noises from the game. Obviously it makes sense that Steve and Alex are silent, but just letting the Zombie say bruh every so often would have been neat to see. That's just a nitpick though, the bigger issue is Hero was able to just sneak past Steve for 2nd place. Not only does he also bring 4 characters over, but none of the alternate costumes turned out bad at all. Each costume also got their own unique voice lines and even critical hit noises. The only thing I don't like is that they're all called Hero. Giving each one unique announcer calls just like the Minecraft characters would have been nice. But without a doubt, the easy number 1 spot goes to Bowser Jr. and the Koopalings. I mean, there isn't really much to explain. Each costume is its own unique character with special announcer calls and voice lines. I also love the detail that Junior's clown car is the expensive well-made variant, whereas all the Koopalings get the cheaper versions with the more robotic eyes. It's simple sure, but it adds to these even more. Similarly, while Bowser Jr. uses his hammer for his out-of-clown car aerials, the Koopalings all use their unique wands from Mario 3. They just threw in so many details that they didn't really need to do for this guy. That makes Bowser Jr. and the Koopalings the easy number 1 spot for the character with the best alts in Smash Ultimate. But anyways, that's it for this video. I've been really looking forward to remaking this thing for so long, so hopefully you all enjoyed it. Since I like to look at statistics, I made 2 tier lists showcasing which alt number was a character's best and which one was their worst. Hopefully someone else out there finds this data a little bit interesting. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This has by far the most amount of transitions out of any of these videos due to me wanting to give every single character a unique one, so surely that's worth something. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.